How does body language or understanding of body language translate to the page? On the page, it can be used most effectively in one of three ways. First way, to enhance the verbal communication we've written. I'll give you some examples here. We're talking about using body language and the emotions we're communicating. So you're telling plus showing. That's acceptable. Sometimes people get so hung up on I can only show, I cannot tell. Well, sometimes we need a tell in order to make it clear what we are showing. And that's the truth with body language too. Here's an example. This is where there is no body language. She tried to ignore me. This is an internalization. For a reader, that means wait and find out what I'm going to do to this character next, because I'm not in that character in deep point of view. I'm not seeing that character doing anything. I'm not feeling that character. Here's a passage from Walter Mosley's Little Scarlet. She had gotten to the age where lies didn't flow easily. She looked at me, at the floor, at the oak. First sentence is telling. Now, this is where most writers stop, but he takes it just a little bit further, and we see this character avoiding eye-to-eye contact. Here's another example. Eyes down, words vague, color up. Anna guessed Heather was awash with shame. See, she showed you first, and then she explained what those cluster of body language. Color up means skin tone, because the increase of blood supply. Guilt, anger, resentment didn't drag down the corner of one's eyes, bow one's neck, the way shame could. So Nevada Barr here, she showed and then told. She told and then showed. It's two sentences. A lot of people who are not used to using body language or are worried about it slowing their pacing want to get this point across. Two sentences. And it deepens. If we go back to that, she tried to ignore me. You get a whole different experience of the story here. Here's another example. The mother looked like she wanted to avoid me. Okay, boring. It's passive. We're waiting to see that character on the stage or on the page, in this case, do something, but we're not in the story. As opposed to this, only the mother was not moving. She was huddled in her armchair, her entire posture, head down, thin legs pressed together, arms hugging her body, cried out the shame that had come upon her, and from what she saw, no means of escape. This comes from Fred Vargas, The Ghost Riders of Ordebeck. Now, this is when you want to clearly make, this is a murder mystery, a police procedural that is set in France, and the protagonist here wants to let the reader know that this mother has a secret, that it's coming out in order to find out who has committed some murders. This secret is at the core of it, and she cannot deal with it. So instead of simply saying it was horrible, it was going to be a bad thing, or the mother looked like she wanted to avoid me, we get a stronger sense of the emotion, the tension, the foreshadowing that this matters. So again, we're being shown and told at the same time. Second way to use body language is use it as a standalone message without telling. This is where you can use show, don't tell, but only when it's body language that is very simple or clearly straightforward. The clenching of hands tends to be a pretty straightforward verbal communication. The shrugging of shoulders, the avoiding eyes, the wrapping arms around wrapping your hands around your arms, all of those are pretty straightforward. In the context of what else is going on, you can pretty much figure out what they're telling you. But when you start being a little more creative and looking at the other ways that you can use body language, you might have to go back to show plus tell. Here's a rough draft version. There's no need to be upset, Colleen. Hold yourself together. That's simple dialogue between two characters. Look how Louise Penny, instead of just using that dialogue, she is watching, her protagonist is watching another character. Colleen's lip trembled slightly, then her chin puckered and her eyes narrowed. She looked down and her lank hair fell like curtains, hiding her face. What escaped was a sob. Now, this protagonist was interviewing, he's in law enforcement, he was interviewing this character. You get in 3 sentences that he's pushing some really hot buttons here, that there is more at risk here. If we just heard no need to be upset, we don't see anything, we don't feel anything. Here we clearly see and feel a lot. Now, you don't necessarily want every emotional message to be in body language. But when it matters and you want to power up that this, pay attention here to this element because this is going to play out in the story, body language can do a whole lot. Let's look at another example. Here's the rough draft. Did you see how Mrs. Jones dominated the meeting? I sure did. She's quite a bully. That's just 2 people, one telling the other that I see this person and the second person saying that she's a bully. But again, we have no visualization. We're not seeing anything. We're not in that scene. Now, John Darton writes it this way. A stocky woman whose sharp elbows took up more than her fair share of table space spoke up. Now, we don't have to know anything else about this secondary character. We see her. And this is one of the ways that body language, we do it in real life. When we want to be more important, when we want to be heard, when we are upset, ends of our elbows are weapons. And we take up more space that way. It's a caricature in some ways, but you knew that your mama was really mad when she put her hands on her hips and she widened her body. You knew you were in trouble. That comes from Black and White and Dead All Over. These previous examples, for the most part, simply show by observing either their own or another's body language what emotion a character is expecting. Now, as a writer, we can do this by using the cliches. The same descriptions we've all seen a million times, which become almost invisible because of overuse. We could write, I felt afraid. We could write, his knuckles tightened and turned white. Now, this we often see, but then the writer stops there. Or we could use something like, the woman smiled. What kind of smile? What are you seeing in that character? But by understanding more of the body clusters associated with a particular emotion, because that is what is being communicated by body language, or the nuances of a particular body part in communicating, you can write stronger, fresher prose. That's the goal. So you can write, I felt afraid, or the snake of panic wound around my chest, blinding me, closing my throat. Now, which one makes you part of the scene? That comes from Kilching by Meg Gardner. You could write, his knuckles tightened and turned white. Or you could write, Jace, looking down, saw that his hands were so tightly fisted that the knuckles stood out white and hard, like the bones of a fish's spine. Few more words, yes, but it expands the emotion on the page and makes it very clear what the emotion that character is experiencing. And this comes from City of Ashes by Cassandra Clare. The third way that we can use body language or nonverbal communication on the page is in conflict with dialogue. Use of this third method is what can create foreshadowing, motivation for future action, tension, which increases the pacing of a story. This is where either if you are in first-person point of view, the character is feeling one thing, and we know that because we're in their skin, but they're saying something else. Or the reader was shown, if we're watching third person, that here's an example. This is, again, subtext. The high school football player. It is going to be the championship game tonight, but he just broke up with his girlfriend. She just walked away. He's standing there. He's gobsmacked. He's holding his football. And you can feel his fingers biting into the feel of that pigskin or whatever it's called now. And the coach comes by. And the coach slaps him on the back and says, "Hey, Brad, ready for tonight's game?" And Brad turns and says, "Yeah, coach, I'm ready." Now we saw what happened. We know that's not how he feels. So that is where you are using this subtext, this conflict between the dialogue and what is being felt. Here's an example. The rough draft. The major heard the affront as he turned and said, "Grace DeVere has made you a Christmas dinner." That's basically just dialogue. Now we got the word affront there, but that's not very much emotion. Versus major, feeling rage, stiffen the sinews of his neck and choke his speech, said in the quietest of voices, "Grace DeVere has made you a Christmas dinner." So we know we're in his point of view. We're feeling his rage. We're not just told that he's upset and angry. We feel it in those neck muscles. We feel it as your throat tightens. And then his tone is the opposite of what he feels, because in the context of this situation, he was not allowed to show his emotions. So this is where you have the training super navigates the emotion that's underneath, but it gives it a deeper power on the page. That came from Helen Simpson's Major Pettigrew's Last Stand. I didn't want to do what he wanted, but did it anyway. Now, we've all seen this written this way. And you know, sometimes that's all you want. And you're moving on and other things are going on and it's not important. But in this particular situation, this is how Charlaine Harris wrote it. "I could feel my fingers curl into fists, and I made them straighten out. Made my face remain calm. If it was also sort of fixed and rigid, well, I couldn't help that. I was doing my best." So now we have her interaction with someone else who just had said something to her and she didn't agree with it, and she strongly didn't agree with it. Now we get that. We're not told, we're experiencing it through her. Here's another example. She was attracted to him. You know, "Be still my heart." Not, because that says nothing. Is this, oh, I like the way he looks, or is this humma humma, let's go find a hotel room? You can't tell. Versus, she felt like she was cresting the rise on a roller coaster, heart galloping before the plunge, arms tingling, brain stutter stepping like it was about to trip. Now we have the degree of the attraction. Body language is about communication. It is not about simple movement. Here's an example. This is movement. When you are simply moving your character from one place to another, there's not a lot of emotion in the scene. You don't need a lot of emotion. You are simply there doing something because they had to get from here to there. Frank walked to work that Friday morning worried that he wouldn't find Sue at her desk. Okay? We're being told the whole way there's no emotion. This is from Joanna Barnes' The Spy Master's Lady. Gray's footfalls as he stepped forward had become the tread of a fighter, balanced and light. Now, in good fiction, we are constantly raising questions in the reader's mind, giving them a reason to turn the page and find out what's going to happen. Do you think they're going to turn the page to find out what's going to happen here? Or are you going to turn the page to find out what happened because he was standing this way? Because the body language, we're communicating the emotion that he is prepared for fight or flight right here. Here's another example that is not movement. It is about the emotion behind the movement. Hank Sanger came toward them down the bar, plowing through the crowd like an icebreaker. Now, if this guy was coming towards you, would you just be standing there smiling, or would you be wondering, how do I get out of the way, or what's going to happen next? That came from Kill Chain by Meg Gardner.